Agenda call to order. Roll call.
Mrs. Dye,
Here.
Ms. Gonzalez, Mr. Laudadio,
Here.
Mrs. Leyva, Mrs. Miller,
Here.
Ms. Parthamos,
Here.
Mr. Stoltman.
Here.
Can we establish a quorum? Pledge allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, public comment. I don't see anybody in the public. Moving on. Public hearing to receive comments on the 2024 tax levy. Anybody want to talk? Nope. Hearing none.
So just do me a favor and just say you opened the hearing and then you waited a second and then you closed.
I'm opening the public hearing. People up there want to speak? Okay, hearing none, we're going to close the public hearing.
Thank you.
Go back to our regular board meeting. Celebrations, Katie.
Sure, tonight we wanted to celebrate the Family Resource Center that reopened in the last few weeks. It has been rebranded to be called the Family Resource Center instead of the Community Center. The rebranding took place in order for all of our community families to see that as a family resource center for the district versus just specific to Tioga. As you can see here, there's a number of services that are provided by the Family Resource Center that our parents can utilize. Medical and legal aid, food and clothing services, language assistance, support, counseling supports, workshops for parents. They also help with filling out registration packets, understanding the report card. Anything that our families might need can take place within the Family Resource Center. The board will also see here on the agenda that we'll be approving a gift acceptance, and that is also relative to the Family Resource Center, where we had a family within our community donate a large number of jackets, clothes, and boots to provide to the Family Resource Center. So we just wanted to give a really big shout out to Lara and Sylvia Kuna and Chris for their work within the Family Resource Center.
Great. Any questions? Nothing? Okay, audit report. Mr. Novak.
Okay, hi, everybody. I'm happy to welcome Mr. Don Shaw from the firm of Lauterbach and Amen. They audited our statements. If you look at the board memo, you'll see that there are 4 documents linked, and the first one is the district's financial statements. And I just wanted to point out that the financial statements belong to the district. The auditors looked at them and gave us advice and helped prepare it, but they're ours, okay? The next 3 documents are from Lauterbach and AM, and they tell you about the review that they did, okay? So, without further ado, Don?
All right, well, thank you for having me. Before I start, I'd like to thank Paul and Jim and the entire team for all their help in making this a great, successful first year. Without their help, this wouldn't be possible, so thank you.
You're
I'm
welcome.
next going to go through the annual financial report with you, which is the thicker of the packets you received. And if you turn to page 4, you'll find our Lauterbach and Amen letterhead. This is our independent audit report in which we provided a modified opinion. This modification is due to the fact that the district reports on cash basis. With the exception of this modification, it was an otherwise clean audit year, in which we found no issues with internal controls or the numbers as they were presented. If you flip about 3 more pages to page 8, you'll run into the management discussion and analysis. This really provides a summary of how the year performed in narrative form. So if you have questions on fluctuations from year to year, or what the numbers really mean, this is where you want to go to find those answers. I always recommend if you're only going to read one section, I highly encourage you to read this section. There's a lot of good information in there. Your individual fund financial statements will begin on page 19. And it starts off with your balance sheet. Towards the bottom of page 19, you'll see on the far right column, the total ending fund balance for the district as a whole was at $41 million. About 94% or $38 million is related to your general fund, which is your main operating fund. It's made up of your education, operations and maintenance, tort, and working cash funds. To see how this fund performed in the current year, we can skip ahead to what would be your income statement, which is on page 21. Towards the bottom of page 21, you'll see that the general fund had a net increase of about $5.3 million. This is primarily due to your revenues coming in higher than anticipated, while your expenditures were below budget. The notes of financial statement will begin on page 23. And the notes really provide further detail into how we came up with the figures that we did with supporting schedules. Within there, you're going to find your long-term debt and your capital asset schedules. I'm not going to go through the notes with you tonight, so I'll have you skip ahead all the way to page 67. Page 67 is the start of your budgetary information, so if you want to see how a specific fund performed based on what's budgeted, this is where you want to go to find those comparisons. Does anyone have any questions on the financial statements? And we did also provide a second document called the management letter. We did provide 2 current year recommendations, and it's really more of a heads up that there's 2 gas rate pronouncements that are coming in the next 2 years, but we'll be looking at all of them to be able to see on implementation for those.
Excuse me, what'd you say, 2 what?
Current year recommendations.
Yeah.
So they're gas rate pronouncements that are coming out in the next 2 years.
Okay.
But there's nothing that you need to worry about at this
Right.
point. We'll be working with the team to implement.
GASB is an acronym for the government body that
Right.
tells us what rules you have to follow for how you account. And believe it or not, that stuff still changes. It's not actually all figured out, which I had a very hard time understanding when I was a young accountant. What do you mean it's not all figured out yet? But it's not. So if there had been concerns about other issues, this is the letter where that would have been. But the other issues, if I could steal your thunder, there weren't any, so they're just pointing out that we have to stay on our toes about some rule changes next year. All right?
Yep, exactly. I always joke that Gatsby needs some job security too, so they come up with new stuff all
Everybody
the time
does.
for us. Any other questions? Well, thank you for your time and enjoy your rest of the week.
All right, thanks,
a lot.
Don.
Okay, board committee reports, announcements, anything? Okay, moving on, administrative reports, announcements.
No announcements.
Okay, FOIA, Mr. Novak.
We responded to 4 FOIAs last month. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Paul on those? Okay, C, construction furniture update for BMS.
Yeah, I'll pass a document here just to tell you a little something about furniture. While that's coming around, I'll summarize where we are with construction. We have issued bid packages, put a notice in the newspaper, invited people to submit bids. The bid package is extremely long, dozens and dozens of pages of drawings and hundreds of pages of specifications. I'm happy to report that so far, more than 60 bidders have registered. We won't get 60 bids, but it's good to have that level of interest. We have 18 different bid packages, plumbers, electricians, the people that build the partition walls that we're putting in 3 classrooms. So some of those packages are very large, some of them are very small. We're trying to monitor who's signed up for those to make sure that it's going to be enough to get us a good bid. This is the month where I have to sit on pins and needles and wonder what happens next month when bids get submitted. So at the next board meeting, I'll bring you the results of the bids. We're going to open them on January 9th. And that gives us about a week to evaluate them. In general, we bring to you a recommendation for the lowest bidder, maybe twice in 100 tries in the last 10 years. the lowest bidder was somebody that we didn't think could do the work, and so we'd go to the next bidder after that. So that's the purpose of the taking a week to review, is to make sure that the firms with the lowest bid are capable of actually finishing everything on time. And most of them will be. Part of that is because we set up requirements in advance, telling them you need to have done projects of such and such a size. You need to be able to tell us what other school districts you've worked for. So people that are new to the industry won't start by trying to bite off this project, okay? So that gives us a lot of comfort. That, I think, is about all there is to tell you. So at the next meeting, we should bring you a full list of all the recommendations. Then we'll know what the project budget's really gonna be. Up until now, it's really just a matter of educated guesswork. We also have a bid package out there for asbestos abatement. It's part of the building project from your point of view, but conducted separately. And so those will also be brought to the meeting on January 17th. Those bids are gonna be opened on January 12th. We have a bid package out there, and we've got at least 3 or 4 firms that have expressed interest in that. So that's all good news that that's coming. I'm happy to answer any questions about that before I talk briefly about furniture.
Any questions?
Okay, so on furniture, next month, by this time, I believe we will have placed a furniture order. We went through a piloting process where first administration looked at what options were available from the companies that we were most comfortable dealing with. And then we bought a few of those and sent them over to Blackhawk, where 3 teachers, 1 from each grade, piloted the stuff in their classroom for a week at a time. So we rotated the desks and the chairs through different classes, and people got to try them out, and then we collected responses from teachers and from students. I'll let Katie and Ann talk to the fun of reading the comments, because people really got into telling us what they thought. I think they liked being asked, first of all. Yeah, go ahead.
One of my favorite moments was when I went into a classroom just to hear from the kids firsthand what they thought of the furniture. And one right away said, the best thing about it is for my peers in wheelchairs, they can roll right into the desk and just feel included like everyone else. Unlike the desks that have the fixed chairs to them. And, you know, she said, I love that it's so inclusive. And that was one of our 7th graders. And yeah, it was so great to hear.
The existing furniture that we have in almost all rooms is a chair bolted to a desk. It's a single unit.
Those are old.
It takes up a great deal of
It does,
space.
and they're so
It means that a student in a wheelchair can't have the same desk everybody has. And it's never a good idea to make people look like they're somehow different than the rest. So we'll be getting rid of that attribute, which is what you were referring to. If you look at the picture that's shown here, this is an overhead shot of a classroom from the furniture company set up using the desk that was the favorite of the students and teachers. It's called a mini tide. It's a little bit curved in a way that you can see allows the desks to nest together. So the students are set up to be they could be in groups of 4 or 6 or 2 or 8, but they need to be in even numbers, okay, so that we can push them together. That frees up more space in the classroom. You end up with a more spacious room if you can arrange it in this fashion where desks are clustered together. Besides the space-saving attribute, and again, I'll leave this to you two to talk about, but it fits much more
You can do it all different ways.
with the
and
educational
stuff.
philosophy we're trying to
Nice.
encourage about students working together than
Yeah.
having the desks in rows and columns, which is kind of the only way you can do it with the furniture that we have now.
Yeah.
There's not much flexibility with the furniture we have now.
And the students commented on how much more room there is at the desk, that they can actually be working and have things off to the side, or they can have their books. With the desks that they have now, because everything is fixed, they really can only have something right in front of them. So that was another piece of feedback that the students gave us. They felt like they had more space, even though it's giving us more room in the classroom, the desk space itself is larger.
I like those desks, but now here on this picture, you have the chairs that do not have the rollers. And you guys are saying that they like the rollers. I don't know if
So-
that's a good idea.
No, we're not doing rollers.
Oh.
So in this picture, there is rollers on the chair. We are going to get these chairs
Without it.
without
That's
the
a good move.
rollers.
Right.
Otherwise, you could have
yeah,
kids
no, we're
from
not-
middle school,
We're not wheeling around.
Yeah.
they'll be scuttling all over.
But I will tell you what the kids really liked about these chairs, the ones that you see with the wheels
Yeah.
here, without the wheels, is that they move. Like this part of the chair
Yeah.
will move, and students made comments about, they can also adjust the height. And so in middle school, you have students that
Oh, yeah.
are shorter, you have students that are taller, and they can adjust that height so that their legs fit under the desk, which was
Now,
very
these desks are
popular.
adjustable too, right?
They are,
Okay.
yeah. And then, they also talked about the fact that they can move, you know, to do partners without having to get up and like move a whole
Yeah.
desk or move the chairs. And we had a number of students who say, I get nervous in class, or I feel like I need to move, and this gives me the ability to naturally move, while I'm learning. So we had, it was 96, let me get back to this, hold on. 96.2% of the students liked this chair that allowed them to move. So it's hard to argue with
Yeah.
that.
And so there'll be this color, but just not with the wheels.
No wheels.
Okay, but this color.
I
They'll
don't
paint the
know
colors
that we
later, I
talked
think.
about the color, actually.
Right.
It's usually like a second.
Yeah, I think we're leaning towards something in the gray family because
Yeah.
that's the neutral color in the building.
But the color that you see of the desks, that's what it would look like.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. The chairs came with those wheels on the bottom, and so we quickly got those taken off and put
Yeah.
regular feet on instead.
So when the kids tested them, there were no wheels.
Oh,
They did-
okay.
they did not
I was
have
gonna
wheels
say, they
when
might
they were
just like the
tested.
wheels,
Yeah,
thinking
that-
they're gonna scooter
That
around.
photograph was taken as soon as they came in,
Yeah, okay.
but
Yeah.
not when they were actually in the room.
Yeah. But that's the only picture he took.
That's why, when I saw it, that's why you guys are asking for trouble. Okay, any other questions on this? Hearing none, let's go to the calendar, 24-25 calendar.
Sure.
Dr. McCloskey.
Sure, you have a copy of the draft calendar in front of you. You'll notice that we have moved the start date to be a little bit later, a week later. That's due to our renovation schedules at Blackhawk. We want to make sure that we have enough time to complete everything and give ourselves a little bit of breathing room. So you'll see that we're starting about a week later. Everything else is pretty much the same as you've seen in past years. In conversations with Fenton, they will be starting a week earlier than we will, which is different, and it would only be for this year due to our construction calendar. They don't have the ability to change that start date because they want to ensure that they can do finals before winter break. And that they have even semesters. So that's what causes us to be a little bit different than Fenton for next school
We could
year.
get back in line with them next year. But everything else is really. in
The
line.
other difference is that Fenton does not take the whole week at Thanksgiving, but they haven't. So it's not a change, it is just something that's different that our calendar is. But other than that, everything should look pretty similar.
Any questions for that? Nothing? Okay, moving on, consent agenda items. Anybody want anything removed from the consent agenda items or any questions on anything? Hearing none, do I get a motion to approve the consent agenda items?
Motion.
Second.
Okay, roll call.
Mr. Stoltman?
Aye.
Mrs. Dye?
Aye.
Mrs. Gonzalez? I'm sorry, Mr. Laudadio?
Aye.
Mrs. Leyva?
Aye.
Mrs. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Parthamos?
Aye.
Okay, thanks, guys. 5-year policy review, conference action items.
Yeah, we've got kind of a long list of policies here that don't have any changes in them. So you can see that we've reviewed them to make sure that we were happy with the way they were in place at the moment. And there are changes in the proposed footnotes, which I occasionally find useful, but that's not part of the official policy anyway. And so there's one here on the page you're on right now, Tim. Oh, maybe it's not on the prior page. It refers to meal prices. Yeah, it's 4/130. That's the only one, as I recall, that's on the entire list where there are actually any proposed changes. The change is not relevant to us because we offer free lunch to all students under the program that the board adopted in July called the Community Eligibility. So the language is not appropriate to us. If it turns out in the future that we were to consider dropping the Community Eligibility Program, we could always go back and reconsider this language, but it's not relevant right now. So for that reason, our recommendation here is to simply note that we've reviewed all these policies and then leave them in our policy book the way they are today.
Okay, any questions on that? We all good with that? Okay, B, first reading policy revision, 5-240, professional personnel.
We don't need any action on the policies, right?
No, if we're
good
choosing to
question.
leave them the same, that would be fine.
So in policy 5240, that's the one that we've talked about as a board, to allow me to have authority to suspend without pay up to 10 days. There's new language in this policy to allow that to occur. If in fact the board was not in agreement with a suspension that occurred, we can always reverse that.
No, because this is the first reading.
Okay. Okay, any questions? We talked about that already.
So
Okay,
we'll bring that one back.
yeah. See, adopt 2023 tax levy.
Yes,
Mr. Novak.
this tax levy is for the following school year, the school year 24-25. These are taxes that will be collected in May and August of the year 2024, and we'll apply them to the 24-25 year. If you look at the bottom of page 1, the inflation estimate for this year, it's not an estimate, the inflation allowance for this year is 5%. You can see it there in the second line. The actual inflation was 6.5, but 5 is the most that we're allowed to take for an inflation adjustment. There are 2 new construction estimates there. The first one is pretty much going to happen. Those are properties and numbers that we know about. The second one is really just a cushion in case there are new properties that we haven't run across. There were a couple new properties like that last year, so it was a good thing the cushion was in place. The average taxpayer, the typical taxpayer will see an increase of just about 5%, probably a tiny fraction less than that. No one will see an increase of 7% unless their property has appreciated a great deal in value relative to all their neighbors, okay? If your property and your neighbor's property go up by the same amount, then the two of you will keep paying the same share of tax you ever did. On the second page, you can see a couple of things. First of all, there's a report about how much cash we have on hand at the current moment. That's something that we always share with this information. And then there's some spending projections for every fund, and then a proposed levy in green in the last column for every fund. Our recommendation to you is to adopt the proposed levies that you see in the column in green, and then that appears again on the following pages.
Thanks, Paul. Do we have any questions on any of this? Hearing none, do I get a motion and a second to adopt the tax levy resolution specifying the amount to be levied in each of the funds for the 2023 levy to be collected in 2024? Okay, roll call.
Mrs. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Parthamos?
Aye.
Mrs. Dye?
Aye.
Mr. Laudadio?
Aye.
Mrs. Leva?
Aye.
Mr. Stoltman?
Aye.
Okay, D, approval of resolution providing for the issue and sale of not to exceed $5 million of working cash fund bonds of the district and for the levy of taxes to pay such bonds. Mr. Novak,
Yes,
it's yours.
the interest rate charged in the market for bonds like ours has fallen steadily in the last several weeks, and so in conjunction with our underwriters, we made the decision to go ahead and try and market the bonds this week instead of waiting until January. We basically could have done either, but conditions were quite favorable. I made some notes about this on the second page in red ink, because this is a change compared to what we sent you on Friday in the board packet. These bonds have a weighted average interest rate of 4%, 4.05%, which is quite good, certainly less than before. The district is a AA plus credit, which is the second highest possible credit that any school district can be, so we can be quite proud of that. And financial management is a little piece of that, and frankly, the strength of our tax base is the majority of it. Our tax base in Bensonville per student is quite good, and we're generously supported by the taxpayers, and that's basically where the credit rating comes from. The bonds can be called in the year 2033, so that's 10 years from now. And the net proceeds to the district will be $5 million and a couple $100.
Any questions on this stuff? Hearing none, do I get a motion to adopt the attached resolution authorizing the assurance of general obligation limited tax school bonds of par value not to exceed $5 million for the purpose of increasing the working cash fund, providing for the levy of a direct annual tax to pay the principal and interest on bonds, and authorizing the sale of bonds to the purchaser therefore?
Motion. Second.
Your roll call.
Mrs. Dye?
Aye.
Mrs. Leyva?
Aye.
Mr. Laudatio?
Aye.
Mrs. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Parthamos?
Aye.
Mr. Stoltman?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
E, adopt bond assurance and disclosure compliance procedure. Mr. Novak again?
Yeah, what is attached here is a recommendation basically to put down in writing practices that we already follow. Okay, if we're issuing new bonds like we were here, we consult with lawyers, we review the documentation carefully, we look for certain things to make sure that the bonds are adequately described to the borrowers. The law here is set up to say that the burden's on the school district to make sure it warns the borrower about everything that's going on here that might affect their ability to get repaid at some future point in time. So we're always very careful. This is basically putting down those practices in writing. The same thing applies to our practice every year of updating the bondholders on what's happened in the most recent 12 months, which we also do. So the reason for this, it's recommended by our council, is that a lot of times in the government investigation business, it matters more what your policy is than whether you behaved yourself, which has always struck me as a little strange, but it's how it works in many, many functions of government investigation. So it's always extremely good to be able to have a policy like this to say, yes, we have a rule that says we will do A, B, and C. So that's what's recommended here.
Any questions for Mr. Novak? Hearing none, do I get a motion and a second to adopt the attached resolution to establish the policies and procedures for preparing and updated disclosures shown as Exhibit A to the resolution?
Motion.
Second.
Roll call.
Mr. Stoltman?
Aye.
Ms. Dye?
Aye.
Ms. Parthamos?
Aye.
Mr. Laudatio?
Aye.
Mrs. Miller?
Aye.
Mrs. Leyva?
Aye.
Do we have any new business? No new business. We do have a little closed session. So, we have to have some people get out. Do I get a motion to go into closed session for matters considering the performance of certain staff?
Motion.
And then one thing
Do we,
on the action. No action.
do we roll call?
Mr. Stoltman?
Aye.
Mrs. Miller?
Thanks, guys.
Ms. Dye?
Aye.
Mr. Laudatio?
Aye.
Mrs. Leyva?
Aye.
Ms. Parthamos?
Okay, District 2 out of closed session. There's no new business. Do I get a motion to close the board meeting?
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Hit the gavel, we're done.